WRFG Atlanta, 89.3 FM, your station for progressive information. WRFG provides a voice for those who have been traditionally denied access to broadcast media through the involvement of a broad base of community elements to guarantee that access. In the utilization of the Foundation's facilities and in its programs, the following communities will receive first priority: those who continue to be denied free and open access to the broadcast media, and those who suffer oppression or exploitation based upon class, race, sex, age, creed, disability, sexual orientation, or immigrant status.
You can be a hero and support WRFG with just a few taps on your phone. Here's how. You can use the free WRFG mobile app to give using your credit or debit card. You can use Cash App or Zelle to send your gift fast and contact-free. Just tell Cash App or Zelle to pay to office@wrfg.org. That's office@wrfg.org. Thank you for supporting WRFG. Your dollars help keep us alive and free. In Atlanta, we're 89.3 FM, your independent radio station for progressive information and handpicked quality music, is streaming worldwide over our free mobile app and WRFG.org.
My name is Heather Gray, and the program is Just Peace, and I want to welcome you all to our discussion this evening. And I'm pleased to say we're going to be talking with Rashid Nuri. To Rashid, however, I want you to know that the opinions expressed on Just Peace do not necessarily reflect those of Radio Free Georgia Broadcasting Foundation Incorporated, its staff, or volunteers, and portions of the program are pre-recorded. Rashid, it's a treat to have you yet again here in the WRFG studio.
Thank you, Heather. I sometimes wonder, is that announcement personal, or do you do that often? Because every time I'm here, you tell them folks out there in the listening audience, be careful, because what he may say does not reflect what you think.
Exactly. All right. But I do that with every single guest, and every public affairs producer does the same, Rashid.
Okay, so I shouldn't feel so bad.
It's not particular to you.
Very good. Good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you, Heather. I appreciate this opportunity to talk to folk about the work that we do and whatever other issues may come up over the course of the evening.
I just want to tell our listeners that I'm going to dialogue with Rashid. We're going to dialogue together here for a little while about agriculture. And I think we're going to focus this evening on George Washington Carver. We've talked about him before, but it's always worth going back to the great George Washington Carver. Now, Rashid, you were engaged in agriculture, and of course, one of the mentors, I think, whether you knew him or not, or this is true for most people I know in agriculture, but particularly you, I think, is George Washington Carver. And, you know, we've talked about him quite a bit, but when were you first aware of him?
Oh, I was very young. Talking to our engineer this evening, much of my life I read biographies and histories is what I was interested in. And I can remember there was a series of blue-covered, hard-covered books that had biographies of everybody, and George Washington Carver was one of those. So
what was the book?
History of George Washington Carver.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this was, 60 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've been aware of him for much of my life. The awareness has increased over the years. I've gone through different phases of my own learning and education in the world of agriculture. George Washington Carver is he's more than an icon. It's a very multidimensional man. The levels of contribution that he has made to not only America but to the world are just absolutely amazing. And we continue to build upon the legacy that he established so many years ago.
Okay, so amazing in what sort of way?
Well, I guess the first, he was
Let's talk about who he is first. Again,
George Washington Carver is a plant. He's a shaman, very spiritual man. He was a plant scientist, trained in Iowa, and Booker T. Washington brought him to Tuskegee at the end of the 20th, 19th century, and he was at Tuskegee until I think he died in January of 1943.
1943, that's correct.
And his impact on American agriculture, American industry, social relations, all of these things were absolutely amazing. He single-handedly saved the South. A lot of folks think of him as only having worked with black people because he was at Tuskegee, but the impact of his contribution literally saved Southern agriculture. And Southern agriculture was built around cotton. He helped in cotton at the time that he started doing his work at Tuskegee. It had just about played out. The boll weevil was eating it all up, and they didn't know what to do. And he came up with a solution, which was crop rotation. Very simple stuff that we know now and certainly implement in our natural urban agricultural work. Some of the big farmers don't do it very much, but to an extent they all do. I mean, that's the standard catechism of agriculture is rotate your crops. And he's the one that introduced it. He introduced soybeans, he introduced sweet potatoes, and he introduced peanuts into the rotation with cotton, and that brought the soil back and saved the South. If they hadn't done that, they would have played. They were mining those soils by planting the same thing over and over and over again, and the plants were weak because the soil had been mined, and that's why the boll weevils got in there and spread. Still scared of the boll weevils around. They don't want to see it come back, but Carver showed them how to do that, how to take care of it.
And again, I think it was largely because when the crops were rotated, it fixed nitrogen in the soil. I know we've talked about this a bit.
Well, no,
right?
It did more than just fix nitrogen.
What else did it do?
Added organic material to the soil. Okay, I mean, it brought nutrients back into the soil by having the crop rotation, so that those plants, the relationship that we have with plants it's amazing. The complexity yet the simplicity. Everything on the planet is dependent upon the sun. But we can't live on the sun directly. Energies from the sun is accumulated through our plants, and then we eat those plants and animals, and that's what we get our sun. But the symbiosis that exists between the sun, the earth, the water, all of these coming together is what makes it work. So add fixed nitrogen back in the soil, but you can add nitrogen. It's all the other elements that come into play. The organic material that you need to put in the soil to make sure the soil is alive. If you're just putting chemicals in there, you're going to kill it. You're going to kill the soil. So therefore, you need to have life-giving elements added to the soil, and Carver showed them how to do that.
Rashid, I was reading some about Carver today and read something that I hadn't before about his work. And with the crop rotations, it so energized the soil and production for farmers in Alabama that there was just a huge amount, an excess amount of peanuts and sweet potatoes, to the point that they couldn't sell all of the crops they were producing. So Carver started looking at other ways to use these crops.
He looked at ways that he could those the crops and their byproducts can be utilized. He gets credit for inventing peanut butter. He really didn't, but there were hundreds of other things that he did that they're using these products in plastics and paints and so many different ways. Carver he had a wagon which he would ride around in and go out to see the farmers. So in a lot of ways, he was an extension agent, and he's a hero. He really is an amazing man. And the sacrifices he made personally in order to be able to do this work, most people don't know, and are absolutely shocked to find out. Okay, and first and foremost was that he was a eunuch. He was castrated, and that's the reason they allowed him to go to school with white people in Iowa, because he was not a threat. Carver was born a slave, and he was educated. And the only reason he could be educated if they castrated him, which is something that was not uncommon back at that time, but it certainly isn't. The depravity of that is not discussed, because it would place a lot of guilt. Here's a great man, and this is the sacrifice that he made for his career, for his people, for the world, to give up his manhood. And what's amazing, if you can go research, there are only 4 instances where his voice was recorded. And he had a little tiny itty bitty voice. Many years ago, I was in Los Angeles doing urban agriculture there, and the man was right. I wish I could remember his name. We did a George Washington Carver celebration over at USC, University of Southern California, and part of that, we had him come down from, he lived in Marin County, and he came down he was our keynote speaker. And this man was writing I haven't seen the book yet, but he may still be working on it, which, in my opinion, would have probably been the most comprehensive biography that had been done, because he made a point of going around and speaking to every person who was alive that had a connection with George Washington Carver. So that's an immense responsibility and task. And we were riding down Slauson Avenue, and I told him, "Are you going to put in the book the fact that he was castrated?" He said he didn't know. And my opinion to him still is that you need to, because if you're going to write a tome as well documented as what you're telling me you're going to do, and do not include it. If your book is the most referenced there is, and you leave that out, it's going to go down as the history, and it's going to exclude an important factor, things that people ought to know about this man. And I hope I put enough guilt on him that he put it in there. But that's something to consider.
And now a message from our Public Affairs Bulletin Board. Food for Life is an emergency COVID relief program to deliver groceries to the door of anyone in the Atlanta area who needs them. Volunteers are properly vetted to ensure safety. The project is a mutual aid effort organized and run entirely by regular people volunteering their time, and there is a serious need for more volunteers. Help includes everyday packing of grocery boxes and delivering them. There are also many volunteer opportunities that can be done entirely from home, including answering phone calls and coordinating volunteers to drive. Anyone can sign up to receive groceries or to volunteer at atlsurvival.org/food.
All right, again, I just want you all to know we're talking with Rashid Nuri. I just always so enjoy talking about George Washington Carver. Here's a quote, and I think you use this quote or part of this quote a lot, Rashid. It's a quote from Carver. He said, "It is not the style of clothes one wears, neither the kind of automobile one drives, nor the amount of money one has in the bank that counts. These mean nothing. It is simply service that measures success." George Washington Carver.
No, it's more than quoted sometimes. If you get an email from me, that last line is on every email that I sent out. And I firmly believe that it's simply service that measures success. I so believe that. Most people who know me know that when you leave me, I'm going to tell you, let me know if there's anything I can do to help. Okay, because I think that is being of service, being in service, is what you're supposed to do.
You know, I want to ask you also, we've had somewhat of a discussion about this, but not very much, about the spiritual connection that George Washington Carver had with plants. And I want to read this quote from something I was reading today about him. It says, "The degree of Carver's impact extends beyond his agricultural contributions, encompassing his service to help others obtain a higher quality of life. Carver contributed to the economic improvement of the Southern farmer by offering alternative crops beneficial to them and their land. Though Carver prides his success on service, his environmental contributions were substantial. He conscientiously utilized bio-based products and industrial products made from renewable resources rather than those made from scarce or non-renewable resources. Environmentally, his contributions were viewed by some as an agricultural revolution. He was an extraordinary man who recognized the natural relationships of living things, both plants and people. He was a deeply religious man who treasured the world of nature and saw himself as a vehicle by which the secrets of nature could be understood and harnessed for the good of mankind. That was his mission in life, and his reward for performing this mission was the simple knowledge that he was performing well God's will."
Amen.
Right. So, but it said, Rashid, and this article doesn't go into this, but it said that he talked with plants.
You've never had that experience?
I haven't. My sister has.
You know, what we live in a world that's so reductionist, and we don't understand the whole. Organic to me means whole, complete, and we're not as people, human beings on the earth today. We are disconnected from the soil. We are disconnected from the natural world. We feel that we are superior to the natural world, and thus attempt to conquer nature instead of being in harmony and in tune with nature. The plants and the animals, all of them form a community that existed long before we got here and will be here long after we're gone. All those folks who say that they're concerned about climate change and how we're going to destroy the earth, I am not worried about that at all. Really not. Because the planet has been here and it's been strong for gazillions of years. Mankind's only been here for 15 minutes. And the real problem is if we don't take care of the environment around it, it may kill us. It's the human beings that are going to have a problem, not Mother Earth. Mother Earth has been here and it's going to be able to continue. So, and I'm going to get back to Carver talking to the plants. So if we understand the relationships between the plants and the earth and the sun and the water, we would have much more, a greater respect for what's around us and our connections and interactions with it. Yeah, Carver talked to the plants. No, the plants talk to Carver. If you get out there, he would get up in the morning and go out take his walk in the fields and listen. We do that in the garden. If you go there and the plants will tell you what they need, when they need it. And all you have to do is pay attention. Open your eyes, open all of your being to be able to receive the information that's coming in. The plants have a way of communicating with each other. This is why natural urban agriculture works. We don't have to worry about the pesticides and the chemicals on there but those plants will take care of themselves. If some kind of disease gets in there, through the mycorrhiza, the fungi that's under the soil, that soil web, they're able to communicate and say, whoa, something's coming to get us. Let's gird up. So they get ready and protect themselves. So they may have to sacrifice. That's what happens in any war. Okay, you're gonna have some casualties. But what you have to do is protect the community, and the plants are able to do that. You would get out into the woods, man. You have different kinds of tree, hardwoods and the evergreens that are there. On one part of the year, they switch back and forth feeding each other. And they literally talk. The communication in the field, in the garden comes up. The most important part of the garden is around the edges. Okay, because you may turn that soil over in the middle, and that's why you want to minimize how much you turn in that soil. You certainly don't want to go in there with big tillers. That's like putting everything into a blender, and you're breaking up all the life that's there. But they communicate. So if you look at our garden, we have semi-permanent beds. They're only 4 feet wide. All right, so that the mycorrhiza, that's all them little white fine funguses that are in there, they can communicate with each other. If I got a big, huge field that I've been spinning over and understanding how the life starts around the edges, the wider that field is, the harder it's going to be for those things to communicate. That's why you go out and look at these big chemical farms, these commercial farms. This soils are dead. You can't find an earthworm, a mealy bug, roly-poly, a centipede, nothing is in that soil that's going to bring life to it. So that's why it becomes a chemistry set. You add the chemicals to make those plants grow. You add the nitrogen in it. We owe that science, that reduction of science, to a man named Dr. Leopold von Liebig. I just think that's a hell of a name. Leopold von Liebig, who back in the 1850s discovered a couple of things. He's the man that came up with vitamins, vital amino acids. He broke that down, and he was able to isolate what are the principal elements. They called it the law of the minimum. What are the minimal things that you need in order to make the plants grow? And by that discovery enabled him to come up with the whole concept of N, P, and K, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, to add back to the soil and make things grow, appear to grow. But what comes out of it is that steroid plastic food that there's so many of, that's what you see in the grocery stores that have no taste. You want to add hybridization to that, GMOs, and you end up with food that is worthless. It's really rough.
Not necessarily good for us either.
My opinion, and I think the science will bear this out even more in the future, is that the human body has not evolved to the place where it can metabolize these denatured foods.
Right.
And that's the problem.
Right.
Yeah, so back to Carver, and they bring it on back around. So yeah, Carver, he would listen to those plants. They would tell him what experiments to do, what would work, because he was a spiritual. He would open himself. He allowed himself to commune with nature. And you use that language of communing with nature. You're actually communing with nature means you're communing with God. Being with those plants, it's a meditative form. It can take you into a whole nother realm if you let yourself go and try to establish that connection that you have with the soil.
So you had asked me, so I hadn't talked with plants. So what is your experience in sort of communing with plants, Rashid?
Everything I'm just telling you.
Can you possibly? So you can't expound upon that any further.
Well, what do you want? What do you want? I can tell you when I ran the rose garden, we had 30,000 rose bushes, and I saw the rose elves out there. Okay, every morning I get up around sunrise, go out cut roses, man. And the little people out there running around in the rose garden. Right. I mean, so I don't know how deep you want to get into this. Just as whatever the energy is, the intelligence that has created this sphere in which we live, God, Allah, prana, chi, ki, that energy that permeates throughout Gaia, Mother Earth, is. And I think it's up to us to tune into it, all right, and try to be into it. I mean, the creation is magnificent. Look at the intelligence. You ever looked at the pictures from the Hubble telescope to see all those galaxies out there made up of millions of stars, and that they're millions of light years away in a universe that I don't know if it's expanding now or contracting, whichever way it's going. It's huge. There's so much out there, and for those who have a solipsist orientation to think the whole world revolves around planet Earth are fools, in my opinion. There's so much more out there that you need, that we should be aware of and try to find our connection to it. And it comes down back to where each of us stands and how we conduct ourselves in relationship to all of this creation that is around us. You can't miss it.
I was talking about my sister talking with plants. So my sister's name is Grace, and she is just full of grace. But in any case, she has told me that there have been times that she's talked with plants and she's seen the leaves move.
Oh, yeah. No, there's so many. See, we look at a plant, we look at vegetation, and we think, oh, them things are just sitting there. They ain't doing nothing. But if you were to, if you put it on slow motion cameras and speed up and watch and see how they move, how they react. I mean, Michael Pollan wrote a wonderful article on it, The Intelligence of Plants, that was in the New Yorker magazine last year. And I keep a copy on my desk and send it out to whoever is interested in it. But how we move around, you know that character, the Flash, that comic book character, Flash is zooming around. You can hardly see him move. Well, that's how we are to the plants. Humans are zooming around. The plants are sitting there, but the plants are very much alive and conscious. Okay, plants, The Secret Life of Plants. Several books that have been written around that subject. You cut them, they feel pain. Okay, I mean they I can't say pain. You can see them react when they've been cut. They react to the emotional. They have our emotional responses affect the plants that are around us. The plants also affect us. The aromas, most of the fragrance, all the fragrances that we use in aromatherapy come from plants. All right? And look at the effect that they have on us in the concentrations that they're used. So yes, you can see that if you take the time to look at it and study, you will see the plants react.
I want to mention something about this. There is a farmer I heard of in Saskatchewan in Canada. So his crop would have been huge. I mean, he probably a monocrop production, probably wheat or oats, something like that. But what he found was, in order to enhance the production of his crop, he would get these loudspeakers that he would put around the field, and he would play Beethoven or Bach or something. And apparently it had a profound effect on these plants. Does that make sense to you, Rashid?
Oh, absolutely.
Does it really?
Music is the healing force of the universe, okay? Of the universe. You go anywhere you go in the creation, you're going to hear music. You're going to hear sounds, okay? And you get the right vibration. And if you also understand from physics, everything has a vibration. So if you play music that has the same frequencies as those plants, they're going to be affected.
How do you know the frequencies of the plants? How would you know that?
Intuition. You got to find. I mean, there's certain kinds of music I mean, here's a better way to look at it. Yeah, this is what I'm saying. This is how we get reductionist. When you like music.
I do.
Isn't there some music that you find soothing and helps you spur your creativity, calms you, relaxes you? And there's other music that excites you, and then there's some dissonance out there that'll just drive you crazy. You hear, I mean, it's all the same. See, part of the problem is we try to separate ourselves from the plants and animals and see ourselves as so much different from them, when in fact they have a higher senses than we do.
Yeah, interesting.
I think so. That's my opinion.
All right. So I want everyone to know you are listening to WRFG Atlanta 89.3 FM. My name is Heather Gray, and the program is Just Peace. And I'm honored, as always, to be talking with Rashid Nuri. We've been talking a bit about George Washington Carver, but also about the spiritual relationship with plants and of plants. So it's very interesting. I mean, I think that you were talking about the reductionist. When you're talking about the reductionist mentality toward plants, would you define that? How do you define that? What do you mean by that exactly? Is that going to be a challenge?
No, I understand it. You know, I talked about von Liebig. When he could reduce the plant needs down to nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, that's reductionist, okay? And it's isolating certain elements of it, and it's just not correct. When they started using ammonium phosphate and nitrate, out in the fields as fertilizer, that's reductionist. That was gunpowder that they're using. So the war manufacturers say, well, we made good money during the war. Now what can we do to keep our plants running? And they put that gunpowder out into the fields to grow food.
Wow.
I mean, that's reductionist.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Okay.
I could go on and on.
All right. In that, Rashid has talked a little bit in the past about George Washington Carver. And Rashid, I know he's one of your heroes. I do want to mention that we had a special program on Venezuela. Ramsey Clark was one of our guests, the former Attorney General. And he was talking about Hugo Chavez, and he said one of Chavez's major hero is Simón Bolivar, and he said that he is sorry for people who don't have heroes. I thought that's a beautiful statement, really.
I would have to agree with that.
Yeah,
there are people. We stand on the shoulders of our ancestors, those who are direct descendants and those who are ideological and historical descendants. And if we don't understand, venerate, and hold up those folks whose shoulders we stand on, whose blood, sweat, and toil made it possible for us to be where we are today, then we've lost something. Your ego will get out of joint if you think that whatever it is you are accomplishing is all due to your own efforts and don't realize how many people and all the spirits and energies that go into making possible where we are today.
Right. So what about George Washington Carver, and what initially inspired you about George Washington Carver?
George Washington Carver was a great man. And as you noted, we've talked about him many times during the course of our interviews. You understand that this country, in order to build a country, you need land, labor, and capital. Okay? This country, the United States, stole the land from the Native Americans. The labor was provided by black people. Capital came from Europe. And since all wealth comes from the soil, here you have a man that made such a grand contribution to the American agricultural system. He single-handedly changed the agricultural processes in the South. You know, cotton still is king today. A bale of cotton is worth much more than a barrel of oil. And they're about the same size. You know, it's probably 4 to 5 times the value. And the Southern planters, the Southern economy was based upon cotton. This is a major aspect of underlying the Civil War. We are taught current history that was about slavery, but it was more about maintaining the economic system that existed in the South at that time. Whether the South would become industrial as the North was doing, or remain a plantation economy, which is what it wanted to do. And the plantation economies were dependent upon the slave labor, slaves who provided the labor to grow the cotton. So after all these generations of growing cotton, the soil had played out. How it played out was The boll weevil got in and ate it all up. Now, those who have some understanding, and you've heard us talk about how you have to keep the soil healthy in order to keep the plants healthy, is all you've growing is a monocrop. You're mining that soil, taking out all the nutrients from it, which is what happened. The boll weevils got in there and like to wipe out the cotton. And what George Carver helped people to do, learn to do, is a crop rotation. He introduced sweet potatoes, soybeans, and peanuts as ways of replenishing the soil. The peanuts and soybeans added nitrogen back as well as organic material into the soil. He started some of the first extension work, mobile extension services, taking on his wagon and his truck, yes, back in the 1890s. His mule, and rode around the South showing people how to grow soybeans, potatoes, and peanuts, and put that into a crop rotation so the soil would not be depleted.
Talk about what extension is.
Extension, that's the extension services. There were two major things that happened around agriculture in 1860. One was, he had three things: the Homestead Act and the 1862 colleges, and then the 1890 colleges, which were the black universities, where the government gave land to do the research on agriculture, and they provided, the extension was extending this knowledge out to the farmers. And that's what the professors at the universities were charged with doing, is providing extension services, teaching farmers how to grow crops, different cultivars that they could put in the ground, and helping them to be successful in their farming enterprises.
Let's just give a little bit of context here about when George Washington Carver started doing some of this work and when he came to Tuskegee. I know that. Go ahead.
Yeah, 1896 is when he arrived at Tuskegee. Booker T. Washington. You think about, now, put it in the history. 1895 was when the Atlanta Exposition was, and Booker T. Washington made his speech about to throw down your buckets where you are. Because at that time, you had, the major voices at that time, Booker T., who was probably the preeminent black man of his era. Du Bois was talking about the talented 10% and trying to integrate. He eventually changed his views. But Booker T. Washington said, you got to be where we are, okay? Let's rise up black people from the situation they are by doing what it is we know how to do, and not necessarily just trying to sit down at a table with white folks.
And Booker T. Washington was?
The president of Tuskegee. President of Tuskegee. So he persuaded George Washington Carver to come from Iowa State, where he had gotten a master's degree in agriculture. He was doing research and teaching at that college, and he convinced him, gave him a few extra incentives over the other professors there, and got George to come to Tuskegee to teach, where he stayed for 47 years. He was there from 1896 to 1943 when he died. So he just did so much tremendous work. And the man himself, his sensitivity, he was an artist. He liked to paint flowers. I mean, he one of the first people you hear that I've read about who talked to the plant, had the plants talk to him, had the soil talk to him. And I know that sounds crazy to a lot of people, but if you get sufficiently involved with agriculture and do your best to become one with nature, and let me back that up. I will tell you, when you come to our classes, you got to listen to the soil, because the soil will talk to you. The plants will talk to you if you pay attention.
How do you do that? How do you engage in that, Rashid? Is that something you can explain, or is it something you feel, or what?
Yeah, that's deep. It's more of a feeling.
It's more of a feeling. Yeah.
I mean, you spend enough time out there and listening to the plants. I mean, you go out, when I go out to the fields in the garden when I'm working there, you feel it. You just stand there and they'll say, the plants will tell you, I need water, I need food, it's time for me to get these weeds from they're choking me. And I mean, so it's not a voice that you hear from the outside, it comes from the inside. People often talk about communing with nature. Well, communing with nature is really communing with God. And so if you get involved with that process and realize that how magnificent the creation is, all of the miracles that take place in a garden anytime that you're out there, all around us, actually, we just unfortunately have put so much concrete, asphalt, and bricks that keep us away from nature by living in urban areas. And that's something that we try to remedy.
Rashid, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back in just a moment and continue with this discussion about George Washington Carver. Stay tuned.
And now a message from our Public Affairs Bulletin Board.
A community rally in solidarity with Imam Jamil Alameen, formerly H. Rap Brown, and other political prisoners will be held Saturday, August 8th from 2 to 5 p.m. The event will feature a variety of community groups providing services and information to the public. It will all take place at Malcolm X Park at Lucille and Oak Street and Lawton and Dargan Street, West End, Atlanta, 30310. The month of August is known as Black August to commemorate and acknowledge the many dates in the struggle for liberation that occurred in the month of August. The co-sponsors of the community rally are Imam Jamil Action Network, African Holistic Health Association, and Community Movement Builders. Additional information can be found at whathappenedtorap.com. That's whathappened, the number 2, RAP.com.
Voting in Georgia can be like running a maze. Between long lines, unreliable voting machines, and missing or inaccurate voter information, you'd almost think someone wants you to give up and go home. This year, when elections matter more than ever, voter rights advocates say there are 2 good ways to protect your right to vote. Either go in person to an early voting location, or use an absentee ballot to vote by mail. To make it easier to cast your ballot, we've added an election resources page to WRFG.org. It includes direct links to request an absentee ballot and to make sure your voter information is correct. If you see that your information is not up to date, or that you've been purged from the voting rolls, your county election board can help, but you have to contact them at least 5 weeks before the next election. And you can access the directory of Georgia County election boards from our page. In Atlanta, we're 89.3 FM, your independent community radio station for progressive information, and hand-picked quality music is streaming worldwide over our free mobile app and WRFG.org.
Again, my name is Heather Gray, and the program is Just Peace. We are talking with Rashid Nuri, and we're discussing George Washington Carver this evening. Carver had such a profound effect in so many different ways. Rashid, you were talking about him beginning the extension work at Tuskegee. But, he just did so much in his scientific work to enhance the life of people in the community, even to the point of looking at plant dyes so that people could beautify their homes. I was always just so incredibly impressed with that. You want to speak to some of that as well?
Well, here's what I would like to speak to. People don't understand. You don't know. Few of us know the true cost that he paid in order to do the work that he did. One of the things that is kept very quiet in the history of this country is the extent to which black men were made eunuchs in order to work in the big house, all right, to be around the white women. And George went to Iowa State University, where it wasn't called that then. To be up there, he was born a slave, number one. He got his freedom. He went to school. He was brilliant in school, but in order to go, they castrated him. Okay, he said, "How do you know this?" Well, don't take my word for it. Go check it out. You can find it on the internet. Okay, but I had the opportunity to go to the film library in UCLA, which is up in Hollywood, California, Los Angeles, and I was doing some research, listening to some specific films that have been made of Carver, and there are only like 4 times in history where you actually hear Carver's voice on film. And he had the voice of a 4-year-old child, okay? He never married, never had children, had no sexual relationships that anybody could identify. So, to give up his manhood to do this work was a tremendous sacrifice. To give up his manhood in order to get the education that allowed him to do this work was a tremendous sacrifice that he made. And they have all the different patents that were made around the soybean, that for paints and dyes and all the 100 different products that came out of the peanuts, and peanut butter was not one of his inventions. All of those things are significant, but they pale in the face of the sacrifice that he made and the commitment that he made to train young people, to help farmers, and to lift up his people, and the commitment he made to Tuskegee University to stay there for all those years. Henry Ford wanted to buy him away and take him up to Detroit to work for the Ford Motor Company. He said no. His checks would stack up on his desk. He didn't even cash his own paychecks. He would not take any money they had. He would send it back to the university. He was just thoroughly, unmitigatingly committed to the work that he was engaged in as a botanist, as a chemist, as a horticulturalist, as an extension agent, as an artist during his tenure at Tuskegee. He was just an absolutely remarkable man.
We need to mention also that in today's agriculture, a lot of the early work that he did in crop rotation is something that revolutionized agriculture, certainly, and it's being used today all over the world.
Yes, that's true.
So we can't say any more about that, I guess.
We said, he showed people how to rotate their crops. They were just growing cotton.
And the reason, of course, was that it renewed the nutrients. I know you mentioned that briefly, but there are certain crops that will seep the soil of the nutrients that other crops would need. Or
cotton is a very...
Cotton is one of the major ones.
It's requires a lot of nutrients to grow cotton. Cotton just sucks it out of the soil. They mined the soil, and they had to rebuild those soils. You think about here in Georgia, in particular, all this red clay that they had, and they're still growing the cotton down there. You have to feed cotton tremendously in order for it to grow. And by rotating the soybeans and the peanuts and the sweet potatoes, he gave that land back nutrients that it needed to grow. And George was the man that introduced that to Southern agriculture, not just in Alabama or Tuskegee.
Exactly. And in 1923, George Washington Carver won the NAACP's Spring Iron Medal Award. He was one of the early recipients of the award from the NAACP. And there's a whole list, of course, of awards that he was given in his lifetime. You can find those on the internet as well, but his accomplishments were really quite remarkable.
He started getting national recognition for his work while he was still at Iowa State. So the Spingarn Medal and some of the other awards he received were just footnotes for him. He did his work. It didn't make any difference what people thought. He did what God told him to do, and what he felt, and how his spirit guided him. Rewards, as stated earlier, money wasn't an incentive for him. It did not drive him in any way. The recognition did not drive him. His concern was helping people, being of service. And if anybody that's gotten an email from me, if you look at the bottom, my tagline on there is, "It is simply service that measures success." And that was a quotation from George Washington Carver. So I think, in all of the work that I do, I think that service is the most important thing that you do. What can you do? My sister's a preacher. No, she's not a preacher. She's a reverend. And one of the things, often...
What's the difference?
I don't know.
All right, go ahead. Sorry.
But she likes that title better.
She likes being called Reverend better.
Doctor.
All right, okay,
yes.
Reverend Doctor. Right.
And, folk can come up to you quite often, and they'll say, I am blessed. Yes, how you doing? Well, I'm blessed. Kikanzu will flip that script and says, yes, but are you a blessing? And I like that, because everybody can be blessed, but what are you doing for somebody else? How are you helping humanity? What service are you providing to mankind? So it's great to be blessed, and many of us are, but the real deal is, are you a blessing? Are you extending yourself out? You're keeping everything for yourself?
Well, as far as being a blessing is concerned, I do want to mention here that there was a list of 8 cardinal virtues that George Washington Carver used for his students to strive toward, and I'm going to read them. They are: be clean, both inside and out; neither look up to the rich nor down to the poor; lose, if need be, without squealing; win without bragging; always be considerate of women, children, and older people; be too brave to lie; be too generous to cheat; take your share of the world and let others take theirs.
Amen.
I'm really enjoying your discussion. I think it's very appropriate for, personally, I work for the National Park Service, and we actually, one of our sites is Tuskegee Airmen, Tuskegee, and also the university.
Wonderful.
Yeah, so I'm very aware of the issues that your guest is talking about, and I really appreciate his conversation. I think I attended a Black History Month presentation the other day, and I was really disappointed in the way that all it did was try to present these great accomplishments, but they didn't want to tie it into contemporary life, where we still have a lot of issues in terms of racial divide between voting and people that are in prison and all these issues. And I was just a little disappointed that nobody wanted to really engage in the issues that are important.
Well, that's true.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
No, that's still part of the mythology and the lies that are being told to Americans. We try to put under the rug, and not recognizing that racism, economic injustice is still quite prevalent in this country. One of the things that in fact, Heather sent me an email last week before, pointing out how most of the social legislation that was promulgated in this country left black people of color disadvantaged. I'll just give you two examples. One is the Land Grant Act, Homestead Act, 1862, where the U.S. government gave 160 acres of land to anybody who wanted it who had not raised an arms against the United States. And at the end of the Civil War, Sherman declared 40 acres for the free state.
40 acres and a mule.
Yeah, but we got neither. First of all, the mule was left out of it. That was added later. The 40 acres, which was originally intended out of the 400,000 acres over in eastern Georgia and southern South Carolina. And it was order number 15, and then President Johnson, who succeeded Lincoln, cut all that off. We didn't get it. The other one that's so interesting, you hear all this conversation about the Social Security Act and the problems with funding Social Security currently. But what I didn't realize until I read this recently is that the Social Security Act excludes domestic workers and agricultural workers.
Mm-hmm. And that's a big lot.
Yeah, that's all the poor people. Okay.
And what I wanted to say during this presentation, that it was like a postcard. It was some kind of poster in terms of what they were saying and the rhetoric involved.
Now, the second one, let me approach it this way. I think that you're asking about separation. That's a very deep question and obviously controversial. My opinion is, this is why Heather says the opinions belong. This is my opinion, not WRFG. I think integration is the worst thing that happened to black community. We spent so much time trying to sit next to white folks and have food, and our community disappeared. It used to be, back when I was a child, you had a doctor living next door to the janitor, and living next door to the lawyer, living next door to the garbage man. On the corner where there was a pharmacy, you had a grocery store. We did business with ourselves, and when we integrated, all that disappeared. The community disappeared. And that's why we have so many of these knuckleheads on the corners. Now they're in jail. The largest population that we had, the percentage of the prison population are young black men, and I find that very, very, very disturbing. So integration, in my opinion, wasn't the best thing, because there were a lot of costs. Now, I think that people need to get along, and that's the kind of society, kind of world that we want to have, and where there is peace and harmony. But we don't have the institutional strength in the black community that we once did.
You know, Rashid, as far as young folks in the rural communities are concerned, I know that there are a lot of folks who will say that when the schools were integrated, it really destroyed a lot of the support for black youth in rural areas, because prior to Brown v. Board in the 1950s, there was this network of black pastors and community leaders, and some black extension actually who were at U.S. Department of Agriculture, and black school teachers who would support black youth. And that dissipated when the schools were integrated. You know, a lot of the black teachers lost their jobs as well. It was really a devastating experience.
That's my point. But it's
I know
it's not something everybody would agree with, but that's my opinion.
What Rashid is doing, I think, is wonderful stuff. and I'm happy to know that people in Atlanta are getting back to the soil as best they can. I hope it isn't too contaminated soil, but I wanted to say something about George Washington Carver, who was one of my heroes, too. I had the experience about 25 years ago of being in Moscow, never thinking at all about Atlanta agriculture at that time, and I met a black woman in Moscow who was born in the Soviet Union, and it turned out that her father was a student of George Washington Carver. It just gives you a sense of how important that man was to the whole world. And what I learned was her father, Oliver Golden, was one of the Tuskegee students that George Washington Carver prepped. There were dozens of them, lots of them. But Oliver Golden was tired of the racism that he experienced in the American South and decided he wanted to go bring the lessons to the colored people in the Soviet Union, which is a very big country and had all kinds of nationalities in it. And so he worked out a deal where he and about 30 other agricultural specialists, mostly from Tuskegee, went over to the Soviet Union, had families there, taught them how to grow a variety of crops that they didn't grow well until his arrival. And this woman, Lily Golden, was the child of that farmer, grew up in an agricultural co-op in Uzbekistan, and I later read about her in Langston Hughes' books of his travels through the Soviet Union when he stopped at a railroad station and smelled chitlins. And he got to meet Oliver Golden and that troop of Alabama agricultural specialists. A couple of years later, we got Lily Golden, the daughter, to come over to Atlanta, and she spent about 2 weeks here visiting people and getting reacquainted with a variety of her family that she'd never met throughout the South. Fascinating stuff that George Washington Carver got started.
Wow, that is quite a story, brother. What do you do, sir?
I'm a doctor here in Atlanta.
Very good. If you think about it, Carver died in 1943. So for this woman, Oliver Golden was the student of George Washington Carver. Shows you how far back it goes, and have his daughter come to this country. That's several generations that are involved in that transaction.
I wanted to say that black history should be studied 365 days out the year, not just 1 month. And
amen.
I never. I went to your high school and elementary school and like a year in college, and they never teach you about George Washington Carver. It's unfortunate that you have to be pretty much grown to try to find black history. But at any rate, I wanted to say that you gave a very nice speech as far as the plants and everything, and I can tell that you're a spiritual person being with nature like that. And when you're with nature, things like that, you do feel you have the spirituality aspect. But I wanted to ask you a couple questions, and one is that there's a book called High on the Hog, and it talks about how some of the slaves, when they were brought over here to America, that some of the vegetables like the greens, I think the black-eyed peas, I think rice, all that came from the African continent. And it's like a lot of Europeans, when they came here, they didn't know how to grow a lot of this stuff, so they took Africans that were specifically agriculturalists. They took and then some of the Africans that were taken to South America knew a lot about gold, how to find gold, how to smelt it, and stuff like that. So if you could comment on that, and also you can also comment on our ancient ancestors in the Nile Valley in Egypt, like how was their agricultural skills? I know they planted according to the planets, the constellations, and things like that. So again, I want to thank you for you're a scholar, in plants and nature, and it's hard to find people like that these days. You appreciate it. And, that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Yes, brother. There are a few of us around who have a little bit of knowledge. There's so much more. I know a little bit about the subject. I've been studying it for over 40 years, but there is so much more to learn. All those things you touched on, brother, were really significant. Let me start with the gold. See, if you know about the Ashantis in Ghana and look at the gold work that they have been maintained for hundreds of years, we know how to find gold and to smelt it and to mold it into things. And the same with the food. Then going backwards on your question, the Nile Delta food has been grown there for thousands of years. Folk have learned how to take the water. It comes in. It would brought the silt down to that valley, which made it a very rich soil. So they would have floodgates that would allow the water to come in, so that they could. That was how they fertilized their crop. So it was with natural fertilizer that came from the silt that was transported by the Nile. And actually, the Nile, interestingly, runs from south to the north. Which is a little bit different than what most people know. Those crops, you go out to the Gullah Islands, you still find some people that barely speak American, black folk. And okra. Okra is, you go to any Nigerian restaurant, they're going to give you some okra soup. Draw soup. Okra has been used in Africa for the longest time. The peas, the rice, all of these are things that black people, the Africans, taught to these Europeans how to grow them. As I said at the beginning of this program, all the wealth comes from the soil, and the knowledge of how to produce food in this country was made possible by people of African descent, and unquestioning. I don't know that book. I haven't read that book. I'm going to check it out.
It's by Jessica Harris, called High on the Hog.
Everything you said was right on the money, and so all you're asking me to do is comment on your comments, and you're right.
All right, thanks a lot.
Hello. Thank you. I really, I'm so inspired by this conversation because it speaks to a lot of the things about in America that we need to really confront. And your speaker mentioned, and this is really interesting because I have a relationship with a guy at work who's a black man who has had a lot of experiences with issues with being a black man in the white world in the South, and he told me, just like your guest said, that he thought that the worst thing to happen to black people in America was this forced integration, because you have these self-sufficient communities, you have black people taking care of themselves and looking out for themselves, and that I think America doesn't want to realize that was the case after the Civil War.
No, let me.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, see, what happened after the Civil War? There were so much history there. Let me slow down.
Yeah, it's a lot.
The slaves were freed in 1863. This year, January 1st, was the 150th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation. But when first of all, the slaves who were emancipated only were emancipated in the states of rebellion, number one. Then when they were turned out, they were given no visible means of support. They had nothing. They said, just go. And how can you expect people to take care of themselves if it's not even given the means? Now, one of the most insidious things that happened, there's a whole bunch of my people who celebrate Juneteenth, as a celebration for the independence of black folk. And what they don't understand, that was 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation in Texas, and the slaves were lied to. They were not told that they were free. All right, so they could continue to grow the cotton to support the Union soldiers.
Yeah, everything went backwards after the Civil War. There was a brief period where there was progression, and there was actually African Americans being in the Congress and in participating in the political process, but that they totally shut that down.
Yeah. Well, Southern Reconstruction started with President Andrew Johnson, who immediately succeeded Abraham Lincoln. And it was because of the environment that he created that allowed the Klan to rise up. I mean, he didn't oppose it.
But I want to ask you point blank, because you actually did say that earlier on, that black people would be better off without integration?
No, I said I think the integration, I knew this was going to get me in trouble. I said that integration was the worst thing that happened to the black community because the community support structure was disassembled. Okay? So I didn't say
I agree with you. Yeah. Yes, I agree with you. And I don't think it's a bad thing to say that. It's just like a reality. It doesn't have to be a polemic thing.
But
I appreciate your honesty about that.
Oh, you grab me. I'll tell you the truth as I understand it. I guess I'm at that age in life where I don't have to bite my tongue anymore.
Exactly.
Think I gave you just...
It's a privilege that you have, and I think it leads to more honesty in discourse than the younger folks, as you might say.
Yes, sir.
All right.
Thank you so much. Rashid, you want to go ahead, and if there's more you want to say along that line?
No, we got it, sir. I mean, we said it a little bit different. That's what I was trying to correct, that nuance. But it's not that point. I think the main point is that we said.
So, Rashid, I want to thank you so much for the program this evening.
This has been a very interesting one. We went some interesting places today.
We did.